In late December, I walked into Avatar Fire and Ash with one big question in my head. Could this movie actually follow through on everything Way of Water opened up? Because for me, Avatar movies aren't just movies. They're events. The first Avatar told a complete story. The Way of Water made the world bigger, raised new problems, and left a lot unfinished. So Fire and Ash had a job to do. It needed to bring those threads together, give us some payoff, and prove this series still has somewhere to go. Did it? I think the answer is yes. Mostly, but not without a few cracks. The first thing I liked about this movie is that it actually remembers what happened before. The Way of Water didn't end up with everything wrapped up neatly. The immediate fight was over, sure, but the bigger conflict was still there. The RDA was still on Pandora, Quaritch was still alive, and the Sully family was still carrying the weight of Neteyam's death. That's a lot to carry into a sequel. And I think Fire and Ash handles it pretty well. It moves the story forward without feeling like it forgot the emotional damage from the last movie. The new storylines don't feel slapped on. They feel connected to what was already broken. And for me, the clearest example of that is Varang. Varang is one of the smartest things in this movie because she breaks one of the core assumptions Avatar trained us to make. These films usually push us to see the Na'vi as spiritual, noble, and more grounded than humans. Varang is not that, at all. She comes out of pain, but instead of turning towards Eywa, she turns against everything that connection is supposed to mean.
Your goddess has no dominion here.
She uses the Kuru for control. She connects when it gives her power and rejects it when it asks anything of her. That's what makes her interesting to me. She doesn't want harmony. She wants control. And there's something almost childish about her too. Not silly childish. More like someone whose pain froze part of her emotionally. The moment Quaritch shows her human weaponry and she lights up, that tells you a lot. She isn't just dangerous. She changes the whole moral picture of Avatar. And honestly, I don't think she's done. That last scene really feels like setup, especially because her reaction to Kiri feels like what scares her most is not losing a fight, but reconnecting with Eywa. If Varang expands the world, Loak is where the movie hit hardest for me emotionally. He might actually be my favorite part of the movie. In The Way of Water, Loak felt like an outsider. He was judged a lot, he never quite fit. Here, he becomes central. He even becomes the narrator. And more importantly, he becomes one of the people who actually changes the course of the fight by bringing the Tulkun into it. That's huge. But emotionally, he's in a really dark place. Jake still partly blames him for Neteyam's death, and that hangs over him through a lot of the movie. And then the film takes him somewhere darker than I expected. There's a moment where he almost gives up on life completely. And I genuinely didn't think the movie was going to go there. What makes that moment work is that he's not left alone in it. The people around him don't let him sink into that by himself again. And when Kiri says, "Stay in this life, brother," that line really hits. That line specifically stayed with me after the credits too. By the end, Loak's story is not just about battle or bravery. It's about identity. He stops living through everyone else's opinion of him and starts deciding who he is for himself. As much as I liked Loak's arc, if you ask me, this movie belongs to Neytiri. What makes her stand out here is that she doesn't just get a few strong scenes. She actually goes somewhere in the movie. She starts in grief. You see it in the morning paint, in the silence, in the feeling that she's physically there, but emotionally somewhere else. Then comes the injury. She gets shot, she goes down, but once she wakes up, she keeps moving. She doesn't disappear from the story. Then comes the rage. And honestly, I think the movie earns that rage. When she talks about hating humanity, it's ugly, but it makes sense. She has lost so much. Her sister, her home, and now her son. But the important part is that the movie doesn't leave her there. The turning point is the scene with Spider. When she tells him, "I see you," that feels genuine. She feels less driven by pain after that. More in control. More like she's choosing what to do instead of just reacting. By the end, she feels changed. Not fully healed, not suddenly okay, but changed in a way that feels real. And that shift connects to what I think is the most interesting idea in the whole film, which is Spider, and the question his story opens up about Eywa. Spider's storyline becomes the big idea the movie keeps circling. The RDA wants to study him so they can understand what happened to him and then maybe copy it. Because if humans can permanently adapt to Pandora, then they can dig even deeper and treat this world the way they treated Earth. And that leads to the bigger question. What exactly is Eywa? Is she conscious? Is she choosing? Is she actually watching? Through Kiri, these movies already pushed us towards the idea that Eywa feels more personal. But Spider complicates that. Was what happened to him an accident? Was it allowed? Was it intentional? I don't think Eywa is just some passive natural system. But I also don't think Avatar is heading towards a version where she is a fully speaking God figure. To me, the most interesting read is somewhere in the middle. Some kind of living intelligence tied to Pandora itself. Aware in its own way, selective in its own way, but not human. And honestly, that's one of the parts of this movie I'd like to see explored even more. My biggest issue with the movie comes near the end, because the ending works, but it also feels a little too familiar. The Way of Water built towards a huge water-based climax. Fire and Ash does something pretty similar. Another big water conflict, another moment where Eywa steps in. You can absolutely argue that this is intentional. Maybe it's symmetry. Maybe it's mirroring. Maybe James Cameron wants these movies to echo one another on purpose. Even if that's true, it risks feeling repetitive. And that's kind of where I land on the movie as a whole. I enjoyed it. I really did, but I don't think it fully stands on its own. To me, it feels more like part 2 of The Way of Water instead of feeling like a completely separate chapter. That may even be the point, but even so, this movie still lives pretty heavily in the shadow of the one before it. So, should you watch Avatar: Fire and Ash? Yeah, especially if you liked the previous ones. But I do think the right expectation matters here. This movie works best if you're already invested. It gives you more if you're already deep into Avatar. Even big franchise movies try to make each chapter feel a bit complete on its own. Fire and Ash mostly works, but it definitely leans more towards continuation than standalone story. That doesn't make it bad. It just makes it a very specific kind of sequel. For me, the strongest parts were the continuity, Varang, Loak's arc, and especially Neytiri. The weakest part was that the ending felt too close to The Way of Water structurally. But if you've seen it, I want to know where you stand. Did it feel like a satisfying chapter on its own? Or did it feel more like The Way of Water Part 2? Let me know in the comments below, and thanks for watching.